breaking news.
Hello, I'm Lynda Kinkade with more now on our breaking news. The death of an American icon. Former First Lady Nancy Reagan will be buried next to her husband at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in California. Mrs. Reagan died of heart failure in her California home earlier today. She was 94 years old. These images show her celebrating her birthday last July. During her husband's presidency, Nancy Reagan rarely stepped out to publicly talk about issues. But as Suzanne Malveaux tells us, she displayed a quiet devotion and strength.
Ronnie and Nancy, it was truly an American love story.
I can't imagine marriage being any other way but the way that Ronnie's and mine was. And I guess that's unusual.
A little bit of a miracle too, right? Something in the gods brought you together.
Fortunately.
A relationship not based on politics or power, but simply admiration and affection.
Together we're going a long, long way.
Born Anne Frances Robbins in New York City, she lived and grew up in Chicago, known by the nickname Nancy. As an adult, she headed west to Hollywood to become an actress.
She signed with MGM. She became part of that family.
At first, Nancy Davis was busy, but in 1949, she found her name on a list of suspected communist sympathizers in danger of being blacklisted from the business. The person on the list turned out to be another actress with the same name, but Nancy wanted reassurance. She turned to a friend for help, who set up a meeting with the president of the Screen Actors Guild, a dashing leading man named Ronald Reagan. And thus began one of Hollywood's and Washington's most enduring romances. In fact, one of her last screen appearances was playing opposite her future husband in a movie called Hellcats of the Navy. Soon after, they wed. They raised a family, including their children, Patty and Ron Jr., and her husband's two children, Maureen and Michael, from his previous marriage to Jane Wyman. In 1966, Ronald Reagan began a second career as a full-time politician and was elected governor of the nation's largest state, California.
Discharge the duties upon which
Nancy was always at his side and always gazing at him with that loving stare.
it was for real. That wasn't an actress. The adoration that they had for each other.
Congratulate you, sir.
That I don't remember thinking anything except that, my gosh, here he is, and he's president.
My Ronnie.
My Ronnie.
After her husband's presidential inauguration, Nancy Reagan's signature was appearing in designer gowns, especially red ones. She also redecorated the White House, both moves drawing heavy criticism. But she had her own special grit, especially after an assassin's bullet struck her husband. She never left the hospital. Few knew then how close the president came to dying, just a couple of months into his first term.
Yes.
Touch and go.
Yes, it was. I almost lost him.
She also battled breast cancer and survived. Through it all, she had many admirers, and some critics too. Chief among them, her husband's former chief of staff, Donald Reagan, who wrote a blistering book about her, including the fact that she sometimes consulted an astrologer.
He's chosen to attack my wife, and I don't look kindly upon that at all.
She also used her influence to launch an anti-drug program, which was reduced to a simple phrase. When a young girl asked for advice and the First Lady said simply, "Just say no."
I didn't mean that that was the whole answer, obviously, but it did serve a purpose.
After she and her husband left Washington, she needed her stamina more than ever after Ronald Reagan was diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
It's sad to see somebody you love and have been married for so long, and you can't share memories. That's the sad part.
Through it all, she never lost her optimism.
Do you ever feel that fate treated you badly?
No, No, when you balance it all out, I've had a pretty fabulous life.
In 2004, President Ronald Reagan died. In one of her final public appearances, the celebration of the centennial of Ronald Reagan's birth, she said,
I know that Ronnie would be thrilled and is thrilled to have all of you share in his 100th birthday. Doesn't seem possible, but that's what it is.
Nancy Reagan, a strong woman in her own right, remembered also for her steady, unflinching devotion to her husband, both in and out of the spotlight.
And reaction is pouring into news of Nancy Reagan's passing. Former First Lady Barbara Bush says Nancy Reagan was totally devoted to President Reagan, and we take comfort that they will be reunited once more. Former President George W. Bush said Laura and I are saddened by the death of former First Lady Nancy Reagan. Mrs. Reagan was fiercely loyal to her beloved husband, and that devotion was matched only by her devotion to our country. Her influence on the White House was complete and lasting. Another former president, Jimmy Carter, also sent his condolences, saying Mrs. Reagan's Just Say No campaign prevented many young people from falling prey to the allure of drug use, and her advocacy for stem cell research raised public awareness and influenced decision makers about vital research for Alzheimer's disease. And this from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He says, and I quote, "I remember Nancy as a noble woman who supported President Reagan and stood by his side. She will be remembered as a great friend of Israel." And we're just getting reaction now from US President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle. They said, and I quote, "Our former First Lady redefined the role in her time here. Later, in her long goodbye with President Reagan, she became a voice on behalf of millions of families going through the depleting, aching reality of Alzheimer's." To many, Nancy Reagan was seen as a star who brought Hollywood glamour and elegance to the heart of American politics. But as we heard, she was not without controversy. For more on her legacy, I want to bring in historian and Reagan biographer Craig Shirley. He joins us via Skype from Alexandria, Virginia, just outside Washington. Thanks so much for being with us. And now, Nancy left her Hollywood career behind to be with Ronald Reagan. They were married for 52 years. What was your take on their relationship?
I think their marriage was made White House history. They were utterly, completely devoted to each other. They were in love with each other. I think their marriage ranks with the Adams and the Washingtons as far as their utter, complete devotion to each other. In the 1960s, political aide Stu Spencer was going on a political trip with Reagan, and Nancy Reagan drove them to the train station in Los Angeles, and she got out and bade him goodbye, and the two of them were hugging and embracing and staring into each other's eyes as the businessmen came and went, and the sky cabs came and went, and they were just completely oblivious to it. And Stu later told me, he said he'd never witnessed such unconditional love among a man and a wife for each other. They were just utterly, completely, and they were perfectly happy being alone together, riding horses or at the Camp David or, in canoes or at the ranch.
And she was also known as President Reagan's protector, particularly after Ronald Reagan was shot by a would-be assassin. Would you describe her as tough in the way that she loved him?
She was tough. She really came down, as you can imagine. She came down very hard on the Secret Service after the assassination attempt, and really insisted that they do a thorough review of their policies and beef up their strategy for protecting the president, which of course they did do. They felt horrible about it. They felt responsible for it. But don't forget too is that he was the first president since William Henry Harrison to beat the 20-year jinx, and maybe that had to do something with Nancy Reagan. Every 20 years since 1840, a president had died in office until Ronald Reagan in 1980. So maybe she had something to do with it. But she didn't get involved in policy so much, although she did say that she slept with the President of the United States, and so she would use that access and that influence to help him along as she saw fit. But she really didn't get involved with nuclear policy or tax policy or things like that. But she would, if there was personnel problems, she would offer her advice or her suggestions. He would ask her advice, and she gave him very frank counsel. They really were. He was a much better person, a much better candidate when she was with him. One aide said she was a great balm to him on the campaign trail.
And of course, she was by his side every step of the way as he was suffering Alzheimer's disease before his death. She also broke away with fellow Republicans in backing stem cell research as a way to possibly find a cure for Alzheimer's. Talk to us a bit about her legacy.
Well, I think Nancy Reagan will go down as not just as a first lady, but as a great lady. She raised millions for Alzheimer's research. She did much for drug abuse in America with the Just Say No campaign. She raised money for Vietnam POWs when they came back in the 1970s. So she had plenty of causes. I think it was a myth to think that she didn't have causes like Jackie Kennedy or Rosalind Carter or Betty Ford or whoever. She did a lot of good charitable works for people, and of course, devoted herself also to his legacy, and his library was going to make sure that Reagan wasn't forgotten. And I think we can all agree that Reagan has not been forgotten, and she deserves a lot of the credit for that.
She certainly does.